Okay, let's get right into it because a major geopolitical event has just gone down in South America. The United States has militarily intervened in Venezuela, and the country's president, Nicolás Maduro, is officially out of power. So we're going to break down exactly how this happened, what the immediate fallout looks like, and what this all means for the future.
So, what we know is that in a pretty stunning overnight operation, U.S. military forces launched strikes on Venezuela. In the pre-dawn hours, reports of explosions and low-flying aircraft started flooding out of the capital, Caracas. And right away, it was clear this was a dramatic, new chapter in U.S.-Venezuela relations. And we didn't have to wait long for confirmation. It came directly from President Trump himself in the early hours of January 3rd, 2026. He posted on Truth Social announcing the strike was a success and stating that Maduro and his wife were captured and have been flown out of the country. And get this, sources are now confirming the capture was carried out by Delta Force. Now, just to give you some context here, this is the same top-tier special missions unit that took out the leader of ISIS back in 2019. So that tells you everything you need to know about the level of planning and significance that went into this operation. But a strike like this, it doesn't just happen out of the blue, right? This was actually the final move in a months-long campaign of escalating pressure and military buildup. So let's trace the steps that got us to this point. So the official justification from the Trump administration, well, it's a laundry list of serious accusations against Maduro's government. We're talking everything from narcoterrorism and drug trafficking to having links with terrorist gangs and stealing U.S. assets. And of course, the big one, that his rule was illegitimate after disputed elections. Now, it's important to note, Maduro has consistently and, very vehemently denied all of these charges. And if you look at the timeline, you can really see how this wasn't just a series of random events. It was a very carefully sequenced escalation. It really seems like the strategy was to methodically tighten the screws, moving from strikes at sea against alleged drug boats to a full economic blockade by seizing oil tankers, and then finally to this direct military strike on land. And while all of this was playing out, the U.S. was moving its own pieces into place in the region. We're talking about a significant military presence, something like 15,000 troops, all positioned for this operation. But it wasn't just troops. This was a full-on naval armada. The buildup included the world's most advanced aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, plus a whole fleet of destroyers, cruisers, and assault ships. President Trump himself actually called it the largest armada ever assembled in South American history. Okay, so an operation on this scale, it was bound to create some serious shockwaves. And as you'd probably expect, the reaction from around the world has been swift, it's been strong, and it has been sharply divided. Inside Venezuela itself, the military's top general, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, called for a united front of resistance. But here's the really interesting part. His statement didn't mention Maduro's capture at all. It was a curious omission, and it kind of hints at the confusion and maybe even a power struggle happening inside the regime. Meanwhile, the government started urging citizens to get out on the street. So this means that right there on the ground in Venezuela, you have two totally different stories emerging. The official government line is that this is an imperialist aggression to steal their oil and minerals. But then you have sources inside the Venezuelan opposition who are suggesting this might have actually been a negotiated exit, like a prearranged departure for Maduro. Two completely different realities. And around the world, Venezuela's key allies have, predictably, strongly condemned the U.S. action. Cuba is calling it a criminal attack. Iran says it's a blatant violation of national sovereignty. And neighboring Colombia, they immediately called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. And, the criticism isn't just coming from overseas. Back here in the United States, prominent voices from both parties in Congress have started questioning the constitutional authority for the strike. Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego just flat out called it an illegal war. And even some Republicans have expressed skepticism, asking, where's the constitutional justification without a declaration of war? So, with the military part of the operation seemingly complete, the really hard part is just beginning. Maduro's removal has left this giant power vacuum in Venezuela, and that raises some critical questions for the nation and really for the whole world. Think about it. By removing President Maduro, the operation effectively decapitated the entire government structure in Venezuela overnight. What you have now is a massive and potentially very dangerous power vacuum right at the very top. And to really get why this is so uncertain right now, you have to remember what Maduro's rule was like.
His decade in power, yes, it was defined by this catastrophic economic collapse and repression that caused millions of people to flee, but it was also a period of very centralized control. And with that center of gravity just gone, the country is essentially in political freefall.
So as the dust begins to settle in Caracas, the central question that's left for 30 million Venezuelans and for the entire international community is this: what, and perhaps even more importantly, who comes next?